Hi everyone, welcome to a new set of playthrough videos of a game called Order and Opportunity Making of the Post-Cold War World Order on the P500 pre-order list of the GMT games currently. Let's just start playing through. There's a little bit of setup to do before we can get going. So I'm just clicking through here the setup. We are setting the world events deck here and drawing a set of them to start, and we are building the development draw deck, the random events that occur at the start of each player turn, and then we're putting down the world events. We drew 6 altogether in Ukraine. There's a crisis going on there. Then we've drawn the 9/11. This card is set aside and dealt with very soon before the game begins properly. Bin Laden, I'm getting the dice out here to determine from a range of possible spaces where the world event can go, one randomly, and we get the Arabian Peninsula down there. Also, 2 levels of rogue state influence are placed there, the black counter there. So the US with 1 level of military influence in the space needs to deal with the rogue state, protecting Bin Laden before they can deal with the world event. And for shipping routes threatened for that world event, we also determine a random space. This goes down into South Asia. And also the pirates marker there, and then we've got ISIS randomly either the Levant or the Gulf states, and the Gulf states is chosen. We put down the ISIS non-state actor marker, the black one there, and then finally we've got Chechnya for Russia to deal with. This is a world event that only Russia may resolve, and so they've got to be busy doing something about that. Separatists marker goes down in Russia itself. And the last thing to do in the setup is to put down a random set of these opportunity markers. These give players, when they resolve 1, extra turns, additional turns when they start playing. So we just draw 9 of them. There were some doubles drawn, so I'm drawing some extra here before I can then populate. And then we can start the game proper. As I mentioned, 9/11 needs to be resolved first, so the procedure is on the card. The US must increase the terror threat by +2, which they've just done here on their player mat, on the threats track. And the next thing on the card is to then resolve the die roll based terror threat check. The other alternative is to spend some resources for a die roll modifier, but the US thinks that spending now 3 resources to avoid the check altogether is too expensive, so they will just try to roll, failing unfortunately, so losing 1 victory point and then reducing terror threat level then after the successful strike. So that was the 9/11, and next up is then the US turn proper. And so we start the US turn by taking the development segment. This involves drawing a developments event. This is the polarization check, but as we can see here on the player mats, nobody has any level of polarization. Only the US has 1 level of terror threat here, and EU as well. So, but no polarization, so no effect. We set the card aside for later use, and the US proceeds to the opportunity segment. They resolve the opportunity that they're able to take here, placing it on their player mat. This they can use to take another so-called command later on. So here US has taken some steps towards resolving the Ukraine world event. They're using NATO. And so the US moves its turn to the next segment, which is the command segment, and this is where the US can actually play cards. The US hand window, so 5 cards were there. They could play 3 military suit cards, or they could play what was the decision play here, economic suit cards. 2 of them have been played, and now the US can start using them. But before they start using them, there's the consequence. So for each 2 cards of a suit that you play, there's a particular consequence. The consequence in this case is increased polarization. So the US takes here on the threat track on the player mat 1 level of polarization. And they decide to use the first card here in Eastern Europe, where they've just positioned themselves for to resolve the Ukraine world event. So the way these things work is, if you look at the bottom row of the card, it shows the influence type by showing the shape of the influence piece, and then the rewards you get for resolving it. In this case, it would be 2 victory points, and then the RC icon stands for regime change. So they can introduce a favorable regime in the Ukraine for resolving the world event there. But to resolve the world event, they have to play a card with the event option that allows them to resolve one. And here the military industrial complex card has the world event resolving option. Furthermore, as the card text says, you have to use this as the first card of the first command that the US is taking, so right at the start of the US turn, and this is what's happening here indeed. So this is all legitimate and fine, and so Ukraine is, the world event is discarded. US would gain 2 victory points from this, but since they use NATO military influence to do this, the EU player, who I'm also playing here, will put their foot down and say they want to have the second VP from this. So in a 4-player game, this would be a matter of negotiations. The EU player has the chance of disallowing the US player to use NATO influence to resolve anything. So therefore the US, if they want to resolve this, they probably want to split the points with the EU. So therefore this now then happens. And then there is the regime change effect, which introduces the democratic governance type into the Eastern Europe space now. And what this does is it also changes the status of the war of ideas, shifting the marker here 1 space towards the democratic, and if it shifts further still, democracies might even be earning victory points from this. So there's a war of ideas aspect to this game like that. The price to pay for using the regime change option is to reduce the world order contribution of the power. So here the US mark has just gone down from 3 to 2 on the world order track, sort of representing the powers' respective commitment and adherence to rules-based world order. And then remains the second card that the US revealed to be played, an economic card with an event option that could be used to remove polarization, but US decides to use this in the Gulf states to try to address the situation with ISIS by economic means. So here US takes a historically slightly different course, and so it increases to 2. The card is discarded, and as you remember, the US has resolved 1 opportunity, so they preserve the ability to play a second command later on during this turn. So they could say, I'm not playing more cards during this turn still, I'm moving into the pass box, but they decide against this because, as you will remember, the US hand contains 3 cards that the US can nominate and play since they're of the same suit. So that is good. One last thing that I forgot to mention, now that the US has resolved the Ukraine world event here in Eastern Europe, the effect is that the Europe pivotal event moves one step closer to being resolved on this three-step track. It's now in the second space. When it leaves the third space here, then the Europe pivotal event is resolved. It's the so-called color revolutions pivotal event, representing a range of some democratic revolutions that occurred in a number of former Soviet states. So these developments in Ukraine have just moved the color revolutions pivotal event a little bit closer. The pivotal event will trigger scoring in the spaces of the Europe theater, so 5 spaces, depending on who's got control in those spaces, will be resolved and victory points awarded accordingly. But that concludes the US turn. Now next up we've got the EU, so that's gonna be in the next video.